Continue. Nahusa released Bhima, and the serpent body immediately died. From out of it the two brothers saw a glowing celestial figure emerged, wearing golden ornaments and beautiful garlands. He bowed before the Pandavas, then rose into the sky and disappeared. Yudhishthir Maharaj and Bhima returned to the ashram and recounted the incident to the others. When Yudhishthir had finished, the Brahmins reprimanded the now sheepish Bhima for his rashness in having challenged the serpent and warned him not to be so foolish again. Within days of their arrival at Vishakhapaya, the monsoons arrived. They set up their camp on higher ground and watched as the rains fell and flooded the earth. They could no longer see the sun. Balls of lightning lit the forest, while streams of frothing water rushed across the earth, hissing the light flies of arrows. All the forest creatures became delighted and frolicked in the rain-soaked woods. Gradually the season turned to autumn. The clouds dispersed and the sky was lustrous. The days were warm and the nights cool. The Pandavas surveyed the refreshed forest scenery and decided that it was an auspicious time, the sacred month of Kartik, to return to Kamyaka. A few days after their arrival, Krishna and Satyabhama came to visit. Krishna knew they had returned to the Kamyaka by his inconceivable powers. The Pandavas were overjoyed to see their well-wishing friend. With tears in their eyes, they rose up to greet him. Krishna got down from his chariot and bowed at Yudhishthir and Bhima's feet, as well as the feet of Daumya and the Brahmins. He embraced Arjuna and accepted the twins' obeisances. Satyabhama embraced Draupadi, and when she and her husband were comfortably seated among the Pandavas, they all began to converse. Arjuna told Krishna of everything that had transpired with him since their last meeting. He then inquired after Krishna and his family's welfare, asking especially about his wife Subhadra and their son Abhimanyu. Krishna assured him that all was well. Turning to Yudhishthir, he said, "O king, the wise assert that righteousness is superior to winning kingdoms, and to cultivate righteousness, asceticism is necessary. In strict obedience to the truth, you have performed your duties, and you have thus conquered both this world and the next. You are not addicted to sensual pleasures, nor do you act out of selfishness. Although you have won opulent kingdom and been surrounded by luxury, you have not swayed from your practices of charity, truthfulness, asceticism, religion, forgiveness, and patience." Yudhishthir bowed his head modestly as Krishna continued, "Who but you, O Dharamraj, could have tolerated the outrage toward Draupadi, so very odious to virtue? There can be no doubt that you will recover your kingdom in due course, when your vow is fulfilled and the 13 years have passed. We shall do everything in our power to chastise the Kauravas." Krishna spoke kindly to Draupadi, saying that it was by good fortune she had obtained such virtuous men as her husbands. He gave her news of her sons who were staying in Draupadi's kingdom, and who also spent time in Dwarka, where Subhadra showered them with motherly love. Krishna's own son Pradyumna was instructing all the Pandavas' sons in the martial arts. When Krishna felt silent, Yudhishthir said, "O Kesava, there is no doubt that you are our highest refuge. We are always under your protection. When the time comes, you will surely do everything to restore to us our kingdom." Then they saw Markandeya Rishi approaching. That immortal sage, who appeared like a youth of no more than 16 years, was cheerful, dressed only in a loincloth and holding a water pot. The Pandavas, Krishna, and all the Brahmins stood to offer respect, then offered Markandeya a seat of honor. After he had been worshipped with arghya and presented with sweet water and forest fruits, Krishna said, "We all wish to hear your most excellent words. Kindly narrate to us the incident ancient histories of virtuous kings and rishis, replete with moral and spiritual instruction. At that time, Narad Muni also arrived and was received. He too wished to hear Markandeya speak in Krishna's presence. With those two personalities sitting amid the Pandavas and the numerous Brahmins, it seems as if the sun and moon were seated together in the presence of the planets. Everyone waited for Markandeya Rishi to speak. They all knew that the sage had lived since the beginning of the material creation and was therefore acquainted with countless histories of great sages and kings. The Supreme Lord Narayan had personally instructed him, and thus he possessed a profound spiritual understanding. Yudhishthir Maharaj asked, "Please tell me, O highly learned one, how a man receives the results of his own deeds. I am mystified upon seeing how I have been deprived of my kingdom while Dhritarashtra's sinful son prosper. Does one receive the results of his actions during the same life, or do they visit him only in a later existence? How do the results of a man's acts follow him after death? Where do they repose when he gives up his body?" Markandeya remained silent for a moment. He looked around at the concourse of people assembled in the forest clearing. It seemed as if Yudhishthir were still in Indraprastha, seated in his assembly hall, raising his right hand. The sage then replied, "The embodied soul travels from life to life as a result of his own acts, good and bad. At no time is the soul without a body as long as he remains within this world, trying to enjoy his senses. The soul is covered first by a subtle body made of mind, intelligence, and false ego. The subtle body carries the recollection of every experience the soul has ever had and thus assumes various gross material forms. Yamaraj controls all of this. Indeed, Yamaraj keeps track of every soul within the material universe. He is empowered by the all-knowing Supra-Soul, all-knowing Supreme Soul who resides in the heart of every living being. Thus does Yamaraj award all beings their just deserts. He never makes a mistake in this regard." Markandeya paused to allow his listeners to absorb what he was saying. "Some men enjoy in this life, but not in the next. Some in the next, but not in this, and others in both. Some men enjoy neither in this life nor in next. A wealthy man who spends this life in pleasure will suffer in the next. An ascetic who forgoes pleasures in this life will enjoy in the next. Those who marry and live pious lives as householders, performing sacrifice and giving charity, enjoy both in this life and in the next. But the foolish man who follows no scriptural injunctions suffers continuously life after life. As far as you, brothers, are concerned, you are virtuous and have been born only to fulfill the God's purposes. You are great devotees of the Supreme Lord and thus cannot be affected by karmic reactions. Your apparent setback will ultimately lead to your everlasting fame and happiness. You will be glorified in the world of man, and at the end of your lives you will attain the highest abode." Yudhishthira reflected on the sage's reply. Then he asked, "O learned sage, in this world our lives are dedicated to the Brahmins. If it pleases you, kindly tell us about the Brahmins' greatness and glory." In response, the Rishi recounted numerous ancient histories. His audience was wrapped in wonder. Markandeya Rishi also described the creation of the universe which he had personally witnessed and the nature of the destruction that occurs at the end of Brahma's day, a period of millions of years. He described how he had floated on the causal water out of which creation occurs. As it rose and covered the lower and middle planets, at the end of that inundation, he had seen a wonderful child lying on a banyan leaf. I was struck with amazement. I could not understand how a child could have survived when the entire universe was destroyed. The boy was effulgent and his face was as beautiful as the moon. His eyes resembled full-blown lotuses and his body was a blackish color. He lay there smiling and sucking his toe. Then his chest I saw the mark of Srivatsa and thought that it must be Vishnu, although I could not be sure. As I approached him, he said, "My child, I know you are eager to rest. O Markandeya, enter my body and rest a while. I am pleased with you." When the boy addressed me, I lost all sense of my identity and forgot my material designations. He opened his mouth and I felt myself drawn into it. Suddenly entering his stomach, I beheld the holy earth with all its great cities and kingdoms. I wandered about for some long time, seeing all the familiar sights, including the Ganges and her tributaries, the Himalayas, and the forest in which I had performed asceticism. I saw the race of celestial headed by Indra, as well as the races of Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Sudras. Although I wandered about within that boy's body for a long time, I never did find its limits. Confused, I began to worship the Supreme Lord with my thoughts and words. Suddenly I found myself emerging again, and once more I saw him lying on the banyan leaf. I worshipped that immeasurably powerful being who had swallowed up the entire universe, and I placed my head at his feet. I asked him who he was and about his purpose. Why was he lying there with the universe held in his body? The child spoke in such a way that my material illusions were completely dispelled. He told me that he was the original Supreme Person from whom everything emanates and into whom it enters at its end. I was amazed to hear him speak of his own glories. He is known as Vishnu, Narayan or Hari, but he possesses innumerable other names. That all-knowing personality then told me that I should remain within his body until Brahma again awoke and recreated the universe. He disappeared from my sight, and I found myself back within the varied creation I had seen within him. Spoken by Markandeya Rishi.